My name is Ellen. I'm 67 years old, and I live in Oregon. I used to say I lived with my son, but now I just say I live near him. Words matter more when you get older. I raised my son, Daniel, on my own since he was 3. His father left us one morning in December. He said he was going out for milk. I stood by the window for hours, holding my toddler, waiting for the crunch of tires on our gravel driveway. But the snow kept falling, and the milk never came. So I did what any mother would. I stopped crying and started working. I took 2 jobs. Sometimes 3. I cleaned motel rooms in the morning, worked the register at the gas station at night. I cooked pasta in every way a woman can think of. I clipped coupons like my life depended on it. Because it did. Daniel never knew how much I worried about money. I didn't let him. His clothes were always clean. His birthday cakes were always homemade. He had his own bed, even if I slept on the couch. He thought I liked it there. I told him the TV helped me sleep. He was a bright boy, always asking questions. He loved maps and puzzles. By the time he was 10, he could name every state capital. I told everyone he'd be an architect someday. I wasn't wrong. By the time Daniel turned 27, he had a wife, a daughter, and a growing business. He had also outgrown the little house we were still living in together. I had bought it with my settlement money after a car accident when I was in my early 40s. A drunk driver had hit me head-on. I broke 3 ribs and my collarbone. But the check from his insurance changed our lives. I used every penny to buy that home. It wasn't big. Just 2 bedrooms, a garden, and a wraparound porch I stained myself. But it was ours. And Daniel loved it. Or at least I thought he did. When his second child came along, Daniel and his wife started talking about needing more space. They dreamed of building their forever home. One day, he brought me coffee and sat down beside me on the porch. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, would you be willing to transfer the house to me? It would help with the bank loan. And we could build something bigger, something for all of us." He said all of us. That part stuck with me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for papers or promises. I just smiled and said, "Of course, baby." We went to the notary the next week. I signed it all over. The house, the land, everything. I even made a little joke about finally getting out of lawn duty. That was 8 months ago. At first, things were fine. Daniel and his wife tore down the back fence. They talked about extending the kitchen. His kids would run up to me, covered in grass and mud, calling me Nana like always. I'd make lemonade and watch them play while I folded laundry in the sun. Then slowly, things changed. His wife stopped joining us for Sunday dinners. She'd send the kids over alone or not at all. The hallway between our sides of the house seemed to stretch longer each day. I'd wave at Daniel through the window, and he'd wave back without smiling. That was the part that worried me. My boy always smiled, even in his sleep when he was little. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from the market and found a plain white envelope taped to my bedroom door. It had my name on it, just Ellen, written in thick black pen. I opened it with one hand, still holding a bag of onions. Inside was a typed letter. Neat. Cold. Legal. Notice of termination of tenancy. I read it twice before I sat down. He had given me 30 days to vacate the premises. No explanation. No conversation. Just out. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. A mix-up. A form they'd sent to the wrong part of the house. I waited for Daniel to come home. I sat on the couch in my apron with the letter on my lap. The onions still in the bag on the floor. When he walked in, he didn't even look confused. He just sighed. "Mom," he said, "it's not personal. It's just that we need the space now. You'll be better off somewhere quieter anyway." Somewhere quieter. Like a stray cat. Like I was making noise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stood there and listened to him explain, as if this was reasonable. As if giving your mother 30 days to leave the home she built for you was a favor. His wife didn't speak to me. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, like security waiting to escort me out. My granddaughter peeked around her legs, confused. That night, I sat alone in my room. I looked around at the walls. I painted myself. The shelf Daniel built for my cookbooks when he was 13. The rocking chair that had been in my family since I was a girl. And I thought of all the years I spent making this house a home. My home. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my chair, and stared at the moon through the window. He thought I had nothing left. No money. No options. No power. But Daniel forgot one thing. He might have owned the house. But the land it stood on? That was still in my name. The days after the notice were the quietest I'd ever known. I didn't pack. I didn't ask questions. I just moved through the house like a ghost. I wiped the counters. I watered the plants. I folded clothes I no longer wore. All the things a woman does when her heart is too full to speak. Daniel didn't come around much. His wife floated in and out, never meeting my eyes. The children still knocked on my door sometimes. I hugged them tightly and told them I was just tidying up. They were too young to understand what was happening. I hoped they would forget this part. At night, I would sit on my porch in silence. I watched the sky change from gold to gray. I listened to the wind move through the trees. Some evenings I heard laughter from Daniel's side of the house. It used to be our house. Ours. Now, even the echoes felt like they belonged to someone else. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister. Not my old friends from church. I didn't want pity. I didn't want stories about ungrateful children or selfish daughters-in-law. I just needed to think. To remember who I was. I had given my life to my son. Every hour of work. Every late night and early morning. I gave him my strength. My youth. My peace. I gave without keeping score. Because that's what mothers do. But something about this broke a quiet place inside me. I began to remember the other times I had kept silent. The birthdays they skipped. The dinner invitations they never returned. The time Daniel forgot to pick me up after my doctor's appointment and left me standing in the rain. He said he was busy. And I believed him. I remembered how his wife once told me, with a soft laugh, that I was a bit much for their lifestyle. That maybe it would be better if I didn't post so many pictures of the kids. That their friends thought it was weird for a grandma to be so present. She said it gently, but the wound still bled. I remembered all the times I smiled and said, "That's all right, honey." Because I thought love meant never making a fuss. But love isn't silence. And dignity isn't invisibility. One night, as I stood in the garden, I looked at the old oak tree near the back fence. My late father had planted it when I was a child. He told me, "This land will outlive all of us." I had kept his name on the land title all these years. Even when I transferred the house to Daniel, I left the land under my name. Not out of strategy, just sentiment. But now it felt like something more. I walked inside and pulled out my fireproof box. Inside were all my old documents, birth certificates, medical files, my mother's wedding ring. And there it was, neatly folded and notarized, the deed to the land. Still under Ellen Marie Talbot. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. I just sat by the window, holding that piece of paper. It was like holding a part of myself I had forgotten. The part that was never a mother. Never a wife. Just Ellen. Over the next few days, I started making quiet preparations. I called a lawyer I'd known from church. His name was Gary, and his mother had been in my quilting group before she passed. I told him everything. He listened without interruption. Then he said, "You have more leverage than you think." We met twice more over the next week. I signed a few papers. Nothing dramatic. Just steady hands and soft pens. Gary said we would wait for the right moment. I still said nothing to Daniel. I cooked dinner every night. I set the table for one. I listened to the creaks in the walls like they were old friends. And I waited. Daniel probably thought I was packing. That I was planning a quiet exit. He didn't know I had made a decision. Not to fight. Not to punish. Just to protect what was mine. My peace. My story. My home. On the 27th day after the notice, I went into town. I bought myself a cup of coffee and sat at the cafe by the window. The owner, a kind woman named Marnie, asked how I was doing. I smiled and said, "I'm remembering who I am." She nodded like she understood. When I returned home that afternoon, Daniel's car was in the driveway. I walked past it. I walked through the front door I had paid for. I walked across the floor I had sanded myself. I sat in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. He came in looking surprised to see me. "Mom, I thought you'd be out by now." I just looked at him. I didn't say anything. Not yet. He looked around the room like it offended him, like my presence was an inconvenience. Then he said, "It's nothing personal. You've had a good run here." That's when I knew he saw me as a tenant, a squatter, something left over. I stood up and handed him a single piece of paper, folded once. No words, just the updated title and a formal notice. The house was his. But the land, the foundation, the pipes, the septic, the permits, all under me. And I was revoking access. Daniel stared at it for a long time. He didn't speak. And I didn't smile. I just said, "I'll be giving you 30 days. It's nothing personal." Then I walked back to my chair and picked up my book. Daniel didn't speak to me for 2 days. He stayed on his side of the house, slamming doors, avoiding eye contact, and sending the children to drop off messages. His wife acted like I had personally ruined her plans. Maybe I had, but not out of spite. Out of necessity. On the third day, Daniel knocked on my door. He looked different. Not angry, just startled. Like he had finally realized I wasn't the version of me he kept in his head. The soft one. The one who always folded. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I nodded. He sat on the edge of the couch, knees bouncing like he was still a boy being scolded. "I didn't know," he said, "about the land." I stayed quiet. He looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. I assumed when you gave me the house, that meant everything. Still, I didn't speak. I wanted him to hear his own voice, to sit with the weight of what he'd done. Finally, I said, "You never asked." He swallowed hard. "We're in the middle of construction," he said. "The foundation ties into the back lot. If you pull the permits..." I let the silence answer for me. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "This could ruin us, Mom." I looked at him carefully. "You didn't seem worried about ruining me." That landed. I saw it in his eyes. For the first time, he looked small. Not as my son. Just as a man. A man who'd gotten used to taking without asking. A man who thought love meant unlimited access. I told him the truth, calm and measured. That the house might be his, but the land underneath it still belonged to me. That I had filed the papers. That the bank couldn't move forward with any expansion until I signed off. And I wouldn't. He tried to plead. "You don't have to live here. You can stay in one of those nice retirement places. We'd visit. The kids could still see you." I shook my head. "You didn't ask me to leave. You told me to." He said nothing. I stood up and walked to the window. The yard looked the same. The garden beds. The old tree. But everything had changed. "You don't get to evict me from my life and then ask for my blessing," I said quietly. "That's not how it works." He nodded, slowly. He looked ashamed. I wasn't sure if he felt guilt or just inconvenience. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to make him suffer. But I needed him to understand. Some lines, once crossed, stay broken. Over the next few weeks, the mood in the house shifted. His wife gave me short looks and shorter words. She called her mother on the phone a lot, using a tone that always changed when I entered the room. She made remarks like, "This isn't how we plan things, and I told you we should have been more careful." I pretended not to hear. I had heard enough. The construction trucks stopped coming. Permits were paused. Workers stood around with confused looks until Daniel told them to leave. I started using the garden again. I trimmed the roses, repotted the basil. I made myself tea every morning and sat on the porch like I always used to. My chair creaked in the exact same way. But now, every creak felt like a statement. I took a trip to the county office. Gary had suggested it. I sat with the planning officer, and ask questions. About zoning. About restrictions. About future development. I didn't need to build anything. I just wanted it known on paper that the land was active, protected, and under the legal care of the title holder. That title holder was me. Word started spreading. Small towns move fast. A few older women from church called to check in. One of them told me, in a hushed voice, that Daniel's wife had been telling people I was mentally unwell. That maybe I had forgotten what I signed. That hurt. Not because it was true, but because I knew who planted the seed. I called a family meeting. Just Daniel and his wife. No children. No noise. I served coffee and set out a plate of shortbread cookies. Then I laid 3 documents on the table. The house title, the land deed, and a notarized agreement I had drafted with Gary. I'll allow you to stay, I said, on the condition that I keep the full rights to the land and the final say on any development. And if you ever try to remove me again, the agreement dissolves. His wife looked like she wanted to argue, but Daniel held her arm. Agreed, he said. He signed the paper. So did I. No apology came. No, I'm sorry, Mom. No tears. But I didn't need them. What I needed was peace. And I had taken it back. A week later, I started turning my part of the house into its own space. I installed a separate entrance. Put in a new mailbox. Painted the front door red. Bright and bold. A door that couldn't be ignored. One evening, my granddaughter brought me a drawing. It was a picture of our house. 2 doors. 2 trees. 2 hearts in the windows. She didn't know what was happening. She just drew what she saw. I hugged her tightly. Children understand more than we think. And sometimes they see the truth before we do. The house is quieter now. Not empty. Just still. The way it used to be before the noise of ambition and renovation tried to stretch it beyond what it was built for. I rise early most mornings. I still make tea in the same chipped mug. I sit on my porch and watch the fog lift from the trees. The red door stands behind me. Bright. Firm. Mine. Daniel no longer uses the front yard. They come and go from the side entrance now. His wife doesn't look in my direction. That's fine. I don't need her to. We have an agreement. Written, signed, and upheld. The grandchildren still visit. More than before, actually. Sometimes they knock just to say hello. Sometimes they sit on my lap and tell me stories about school. One of them told me I smell like soap and cookies. I told her that's because I always have both. I never spoke to them about what happened. That's not their burden. One day, when they're older, they'll understand why Nana drew a line in the soil and stood her ground. But for now, they just know I'm here. And I always will be. I've started painting again. Nothing grand. Just little things. Flowers. Fruit. The oak tree out back. It feels good to hold a brush. To create instead of react. My hands are slower now but steadier. Like they know this is the season for gentleness. Gary checks in every few weeks. He says the new agreement was a wise move. He told me I handled it with more grace than most would. I thanked him. But truthfully, I wasn't looking for praise. Just peace. I've also begun attending a small writing circle at the library. It's mostly women like me. Women with full hearts and tired knees. We sit around a long oak table and tell our stories. Some are soft. Some are jagged. But all of them are real. Last week, I shared a piece I wrote about my porch. How it held memories in every board. How it watched me grow from a young mother to an older woman who finally said enough. One woman cried. Another held my hand. None of them judged. There's something powerful in being known. Not just seen. Known. Daniel still avoids conversation. I don't push. Some bridges don't burn. They just fade. Maybe one day he'll find his way back. Maybe not. But I'm not waiting at the door anymore. I don't regret giving him the house. I did it with love. That love still exists, even if the shape of it has changed. What I do regret is thinking I had to disappear in the process. I don't believe that anymore. I've learned that motherhood does not mean martyrdom. That quiet doesn't mean powerless. and that giving does not require forgetting yourself in the transaction. I am still Ellen. Not just mom. Not just Nana. Not just the old woman in the back room. I am the woman who planted her roots, watered them, and watched them grow deep. Now, I tend to them with care. If you're watching this and you've ever felt erased, by your children, by time, by the shifting sands of age, I want you to hear me. You are not a burden. You are not finished. You are not invisible. You are the foundation they stood on. And you are allowed to stay standing. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. Someone out there needs to hear that they are not alone. And maybe, just maybe, it's you.